Welcome everyone to the 4th edition of the EU and CIS Tier 2 Awards. 3rd year running in the studio as well, Jay. And I expect there'll be a lot of trolling today.
Yes, it's going to be the trolling awards at this point with how well I do against the Wag. I've actually decided that now I'm going to purposely pick into bad options.
Okay.
Just to make this guy tilted off the face of the earth. Plus, not to mention, it's very boring if we all pick the same stuff every single time. So.
I would say this year, like normally in the past few years, we actually have had similar sort of names. And there's actually been players, certain categories that has been really easy. There's actually been a lot of searching, I would say, this year. I don't think teams and players have maybe been as successful in Tier 2 as what they have in previous years. And that might just be because of the influx of newer teams and maybe even Tier 1 squads kind of dropping down the divisions. Yeah,
I'd say so too. I mean, last year, 2023, it was very much the year of the Tier 2 environment. We had the major, which led to the rise of all these significant talents, and it wasn't quite as impactful this year. I think as well that with the way that the Tier 2 structure is going to shift in next year as well, it might get even more difficult for teams and players to break through. So this is definitely going to be a key year in terms of everyone's breakout opportunities, and I think next year as well it's going to be even much of an opportunity or much of a bigger challenge to make those opportunities happen for everybody involved.
Well, let's get into the first category then. Best breakout player. Now, this is a new category. This is something that we haven't done before.
Well,
We've replaced it with the youngest name.
It's technically like a shift in terms of how we defined previously, because it was the best young player, which was like 18 years and younger. Right? I mean, there's a big gap there in terms of where we go with the best young player and best veteran, so we just decided to broaden it out a little bit, I think.
Yep. Okay, well, what's your second?
So I'm going to piss a lot of people off already. Because everyone's been ranting and raving about this kid, and respect to Will for what he's done in the last few months, but I'm not quite ready to put him in first place yet, and that's Spirit Academy's Keisuke. I told you. I told you. I'm here to troll, and that's what I'm going to do. Here's my issue with putting him. And look, I got to give him a lot of credit. He takes a second place award for me because of how sick he looks as an individual.
Sure.
But my problem is, in terms of judging him and putting him as a first place individual, is the fact that he hasn't quite faced that high-end Tier 2 opposition in a massive form yet. And I think there is at least one other player that you can say has faced the top-end Tier 2 opposition, has made success happen in the high-end Tier 2 opposition that Keisuke hasn't quite found just yet. His stats are brilliant, and I'd imagine that next year he may well be in for one of these awards, but not right now, not at this very moment.
Yeah, I had a gut feeling that you were going to pick him, and my counter-argument is he's yet to play a top 30 team on HLTV. That is insane, right? Like, your stats might be unbelievable, but if you haven't played one top 30 HLTV team, that's normally where we start categorizing the top of Tier 2.
Yeah.
So he's got a long way to come. He hasn't even played that many tournaments at Spirit Academy. I haven't even seen him on LAN. Me and you, we casted them fairly recently, and we got a little bit of a vibe of some of the other players on the roster. So I'm sure there'll be some more names from that Spirit Academy roster that we'll talk about in higher degree come next year.
Well, look, what I'll say is this. He's on the right trajectory. He's on the donk trajectory, but he's still here in the donk trajectory. Donk is all the way over here. So he's on the right path, and he looks really good. I just need to see more at the higher end of the Tier 2 space for me.
Okay, your number one then?
My number one? Okay, well, we'll go with Flamus over from the, now Gamer Legion, but previously broke out on the Mega, I was going to say the Mega Academy, no, the main Mega side earlier on during the Rest Regional Circuit. He was placing first places as well, was being just an absolutely sick player. I was worried once he left that the Mega were going to fall apart, and he's gone on to do great things with Gamer Legion. They've had a very, very sick end to the year with a couple of good placements in the online circuit as well. Haven't quite been as LAN prevalent, which I want to see from him next year. But in terms of a breakout talent, a guy that's hit the ground running in this year, he's the man for me.
That's fair. I mean, he kind of has come out of nowhere. Hasn't been a name for the majority of those names on Omega that we weren't familiar with at all in the last couple of years of CS outside of Lear. So, yeah, I probably won't debate you that much on that one. Again, breakout player is basically guys that we don't know of making a name for themselves on the scene. Now, my second place is going to be Gravity from 3DMAX. Now, he has been around for a little while, but when I think about his previous teams on Gen 1, LDLC, that Ghouls W roster, we're talking about low-end Tier 2, Tier 3, and he gets a huge chance, right? Like, he gets a call-up to 3DMAX, which is the #1 French team, and he's actually held weight at Tier 1. You and I, we casted the Skyesports Championship event, and we saw him really deliver in the playoffs. Now, just to give you a little bit of an idea of this Gravity kid, 20 years old, his first LAN was ESL Pro League with 3D Max. You're getting thrown just straight into the deep end, and he was able to push for a top 12 there. He was able to get 3D Max into the playoffs. You go into the Skyesports Championship, you win that tournament. He was fantastic in the playoffs. And then your third LAN is IEM Cologne. So it's just, you're getting those reps in on the big name events. Fourth LAN was ESL Pro League, and then since then he's got the RMR coming up. So I think for Gravity, looking at that jump to basically just being a bit of an unknown player on unknown quantities to then getting the chance to play with 3D Max.
Yeah, he's a great pick, I think. I mean, he's a guy that has been part of the 3D Max side that are, in my eyes, one of, if not, well, maybe the best tier 2 team in the scene at the moment. There's certainly a lot of reps towards the Frenchman's favour, and they're definitely going to be appearing in more awards as we go down the line. So keep your eyes out on that. Very, very solid second place pick. But you mentioned a lot of good tournaments he's competed in, even in the tier 1 environment. It makes me curious to find out who that first place guy is going to be.
Yeah, well, my number one is going to be Jota, out from Sangul. 22 years old, played on Eternal Fire Academy, on loan for Sangul since about March time this year. And for him, I mean, his LAN stats are just insane. I mean, let's just think about the Pro League run that they had in Season 20. Opening matchup is versus FaZe, and you're like, shit, we've got FaZe in the opening game. We're Sangul, we're not LAN proven. And he top frags the server. He is outclassing tier 1 players in FaZe. Ended up dropping nearly 60 kills in that best of 3, 1.38 rating. And even in that Pro League run, we saw Sangul upsetting quite a few squads. We saw him basically being the main star player. So to go from an academy team over to Sangul, go into your first LAN and just start destroying, I think easily has to be my number 1 breakout player this year.
Yeah, it's a very good point you make. I think it's very curious how we're very, very different in terms of our picks this time around, and not just completely for troll reasons, but also because like, there's been a number of great players that still come out, even if this year hasn't been quite as prevalent. I think last year you had some definitive favourite guys that were like, okay, these guys are the shit. But we've got a lot of players that have come through this year, and a lot of guys that I think deserve a lot of credit. I mean, I even shortlisted a bunch of other names, like Namana, for instance, that came through on the... I know that he's been part of Zero Tenacity for the last few years, but this has been the year where Zero Tenacity have done extremely well, and for him, he was part of my initial shortlist as an example. Of just
any
other
more,
guys.
or just him?
Well, you know, there were a few others. I made some other mistakes. Like I stupidly put down Result and Slen, forgetting that they also did stuff last year as well. So not entirely like my entire shortlist was fantastic. But again, there are key examples, I think, across the board here.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's move into category number 2. Now, this is best established player. So when I look at this category, this is someone that's a familiar name in Tier 2. Maybe a person that we've known for many years, maybe had some success at the higher end, lower end, just someone that we know. So who's your second pick for this category?
Oh, before we get there, a small thing I wanted to sort of explain my criteria a little bit, because one of the key conversations and contention points for me was, do I include Eternal Fire in my awards? And for some awards, I think they can count, but looking at the totality of the year, I think they've been a tier 1 squad for more of the year. Therefore, even though he's probably the statistically best player right now in the scene in terms of the tier 2 space as a veteran, I'm not going to include Zentaris in my
I didn't
awards.
include him this year for that reason as well.
I mean, look, again, I think Eternal Fire can be good into one particular award, which we'll get to that when we get towards it. But again, in terms of my player of the year, my established player of the year, not quite enough for me, or not quite low enough in terms of the rankings for me to include them. So again, honorable mention, I guess you could say, towards Zentaris. But in terms of my second place, I went with Result.
Okay.
Over from the Aurora and Bait sides, and he's been doing extremely good things as of late. He's
involved in some drama with the Nine Pandas move.
Involved in some drama in the Nine Pandas move. He's had some awkward stuff happen in that, and that's probably the reason why I've set it back a little bit, because even though he's carried his performance over, unfortunately, I feel like that move was, again, might be brought up a little bit later, but that move particularly might have brought him back a little bit for me.
Okay. Well, my second is going to be a player that doesn't get spoken about very much in Tier 2, and it's because he's a role player, and I'm going to go with Shock out on Sinners.
Okay.
This is a guy who, let's just think about this category. A lot of people are thinking, right, star players, guys that are going to put up massive numbers. Shock is not a star player. He's an anchor. He plays small site on Mirage. He plays A. Ancient, he plays A. You're not really going to be involved in much outside of maybe some mid takes. Anubis, you're on A. Dust 2, you're playing B side. But honestly, he has been unreal this year. I think his multi-fragging ability is excellent. I think he's the second in command behind Oscar. He's a guy that is really good in late round clutches. We've casted a lot of sitters recently, and Shock has caught my eye for what is a supportive rifler to just be so on the money with impact. And I think he was key in the RMR closed qualification. I think he's been key in quite a few of the local lands. I know the tip sports circuit is quite big in that Czechoslovakian region.
Yes.
Pushed Sinners into 3 grand finals there. And I'm actually going to be really hoping to see a good performance from Shock at the RMR, because he's not a guy that gets spoken about, but I think he is extremely good in the role that he plays.
I definitely dipped off my radar. I'll tell you that. I didn't have him shortlisted in terms of my particular predictions, or my picks rather, for this particular award. I will admit though that Sinners, they don't strike me as like a consistent high-end tier 2 space, which is probably the reason consistent high-end tier 2 team rather. It was probably the reason why he did dip off my radar, because of the fact that I think that I've had this one good surgence in terms of the RMR qualifier, but they haven't quite been able to maintain it in the other tier 2 cups. We'll see how that goes in terms of the RMR itself and where they stand at the end of the Shanghai Major. And by the way, just to clarify, we're recording this on November 5th, so I don't know when you're going to publish this.
As soon as possible,
as soon as possible. But in case it ends up getting delayed, just to let you know, if you're wondering why we haven't included the RMR or the major or anything in terms of that, it's because it hasn't happened yet. So I want to see where that goes. I want to see where that happens before I can truly put Sinners in these categories for me personally.
Yeah, I just think, again, when you've got what is a veteran lineup on a core with some newer pieces in, I think Shock has transitioned that period on basically being a leader in the squad by leading by example in many best of threes, and probably imparting a lot of wisdom to some of those younger guys in Marisco and Mikey. So yeah, Shock gets my number 2 today.
Okay, well, my number 1 has got to be MAKKU over from 3DMAX. Statistically, the best player on the roster, and for 3DMAX as well, just thinking about the year that they've had has just been remarkable, I think, from the Frenchmen. They transitioned into CS2 very strong. They have, of course, some contentious futures about the organization itself, but I know that these guys are extremely good at the moment, and in terms of what MAKKU's output has been to give 3DMAX the Skyesports Championship that you mentioned earlier on, the runs in the Tier 2 space and everything that they've had over the course of the year. I've just been a big fan of how this squad has consistently maintained themselves. Even when I think to myself, okay, this is where it starts to end. This is where it starts to fall off. They never end up doing, and MAKKU's always leading the charge in those environments.
Yeah, and just to put this to the audience, we don't know what each other select. We come in here completely separated, and I've also got MAKKU. He's my number 1 choice. That just tells you how strong he's been this year. If we're both picking him for number 1, this is a guy that has performed at the LAN environment as an in-game leader and an AWPer, and brought this team up to a bit of relevancy. I would look at this whole core of Double Pony, 3DMAX, and sort of said, okay, they were always quite average in the sense that they were towards the top end of Tier 2, but they've never really qualified to many lands, never really got the taste of what it has been at Tier 1. So to be able to not only push that team slightly higher up the pedigree and perform against the Tier 1 squads, I mean, he's got a lot going for him. Just some numbers perspective so far this year, he's got under 60 maps played on LAN, 57 to be precise. That's a lot for a team like 3DMAX to have almost 60 maps played on LAN, 1.10 rating, like you mentioned, best player on 3DMAX. So, and I guess too, with the conversations of the whole org and being unorged in the past, all 3DMAX, I mean, I'm sure that's even more pressure for someone that's the captain and the AWPer to lead the boys and say, right, well, we need to keep pushing. We need to make sure the results are coming, because next year is uncertainty.
You rarely see someone that shares the AWPIGL role and does it as well as he does. So again, he's got a lot of pressure on himself. He's handled it extremely well as a Tier 2 team. I want to hope to see 3DMAX make a run at the Tier 1 environment. They've had a couple of chances across their life cycle, but I think that they have as much of a best opportunity as anyone right now in the Tier 2 space. MAKKU's leading that charge, and well, one of the rare, well, I hope rare occasions where we're going to have one of our commonality picks in first place.
Okay, let's move into Best Player of the Year. Now, this, in my eyes, was a bit easier. I didn't have many people on the shortlist for this. So what's your second place for this?
Well, just to give my logic and how I feel is that if I'm going to pick a young, new breakout player as a best young breakout player and a best veteran, it's going to be one of those two players, right?
Okay.
It has to be one of those individuals because of the nature of how the rankings work. So for me, it had to be a choice between MAKKU and Flamus as to who I sit in second and first place. And so for my second place, I had to weigh up all the options. I had to weigh up everything. And I went with Flamus here. I just think that the achievements that the 3DMAX side have done compared to theMAKKU and Gamer Legion have just been that little step up. They've just been that little bit extra. And as a result, I mean, obviously, spoiler, no, we go back and forth for second and first, but that does mean that I do put MAKKU as my first place pick in terms of best player of the year.
Yeah, so I've actually taken none from the previous categories. And the reason for that is both of these players are kind of established in Tier 2, in which we've seen them for the last few years, but they're also not breakout players, but they're not they haven't been here for too long. So because they don't quite line on either of that side, I've gone for two completely different players. My number 2 is going to be Nilo from Metasport.
Okay.
19 years old. The one factor why he's in my second is that he hasn't played a single LAN this year. But is that his fault? That's Metasport not qualifying to LANs. Now, they got the invite to the Get Rio tournament, which is, I think, where he had some school-ish, or like he had exams or something, and he was the one that got stood in from Plopsky. So the one LAN that they went to, he didn't even get to play. His numbers are just incredible. I think for a team that has been really struggling this year, he is easily the best player by far. I think he's Tier 1 ready right now. And I feel for him because you are putting in such a good shift and you're not pushing for results. You're not pushing for titles. So your hands are strung. What do you do on a team that's not towards the top end of Tier 2 when you're this good?
So I actually had Nilo shortlisted as my best established player, but it's the same sort of thing. It's like he's not quite established, but he's not quite new because he had those years on Young Ninjas and he's done well on Metasport this year, but he hasn't quite pushed to the same breakout level as someone like a Flamus, for instance. And it is such a weird sort of way in which you weigh him up
it is.
in terms of those categories. And I'm guessing in the future that there's going to be more opportunities for other players like that now that we've broadened out the criteria, because you are right, Nilo has been sick. I agree with you that he's Tier 1 ready, and I think that unfortunately Metasport have fumbled the bag to a certain capacity over the course of the year. That breakout opportunity that they had at the start of the year with the Blaster showdown and everything was really key in potential in showing exactly what ZTR could do as an IGL and Nilo could do as an individual player, and unfortunately for Nilo specifically, it hasn't quite led up to the kinds of results that I would have hoped out of him.
Yeah, just to give an idea, he posts over a 1 rating against top 10 teams in the world this year. No one else on his team's been able to even come close. So I do feel for Nilo. It's been a tough year, and I'm sure next year he'd be striving for a lot more because I would say Young Ninjas wasn't massively successful in Tier 2. They were okay. Metasport at the start of the year was really good, but then they've been okay. This has got to be a guy that's looking at it saying, I want to be on a top Tier 2 team. I want to be on a team that can push those boundaries. And my number 1 is a player that has been able to do that, of MPL, the in-game leader for Bait. I think we've seen a lot of interviews from him basically saying how he sees the in-game leadership differently, that you need to be impactful, you need to be really on the ball when it comes to individual ability to push for numbers, and he's done exactly that. Now, he hasn't qualified to a huge amount of LANs, but in the ones that they have done, you have a second place at an ESL Challenger, you get to the stage at Alyssa Masters Espo, and I just think for such a young player that's also the captain, I have been so impressed with how he's developed Bait into this year.
Yeah, look, I will say that, again, MPL was on my shortlist for established player. He actually ranked in number 3 for me, so he was very close to taking over Resol. My thing is that he's not the only great performer on Bait. You've got guys like Headtrick there as well. So in case of my eyes, is that the impact between those two players is certainly shared. As an IGL, he's certainly got impact in terms of the in-server performance. As a player, I do respect the pick, obviously, in terms of giving him first place. It's a very, very good idea in my eyes. I think in terms of the way that I weigh up my criteria, it's a little bit different to yours. And look, it's a solid pick. I will say that much at the most.
But he's played about 300 maps on HLTV online this year and averaging nearly a 1.20 rating. That just tells you that he has been farming the Tier 2 competition. I'd like to see him and Bait play a little bit more Tier 2 higher-end LAN events, come into next year, try and see if they can push that pedigree even further. But yeah, my number 1 for this year.
Okay, cool. Next category, Drake.
Okay, best match of the year. Now, I've gone for one I've casted, and, well, we'll get to the first one after that. So, what's your second pick for best match of the year?
I also went for one that we cast in.
Okay.
And for me, and obviously how you rate the best match is very, very different in terms of like the performance of the match itself, how good it was, and maybe even the storylines coming into that matchup. And I was such a big fan of the unpaid storyline from the rest regional champions from earlier on this year. So I picked their match against Paravision from the group stage decider match. I was actually recently watching back that match to get some clips for the show reel, Dwayne. And I will say that in terms of how a game that you could have for unpaid, and then the nature in which they handle themselves when playing from the back foot. It was such a cool thing to see guys like Jacob going off and doing great things. Guys like Cypher having impactful rounds. Guys like Nexa even, who obviously is getting a lot of criticism for being part of that Bleed unpaid roster, doing amazing things throughout the course of that LAN. And that match, I think, was the key highlight of their entire run, from going from unpaid to being paid.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's a lovely story, and it's one that a lot of people will remember over the course of this entire year. Now, my second place is actually going to be Metasport versus Apex in the last qualifier for the showdown, way back in February. Now, at the time, Metasport were ranked 54th on HLTV. They were upsetting quite a bit in the group stage, and even their first best of 3, they go up an Apex side that's number 10 in the world, really pushing that top end of tier 2, and it ends up being a Metasport win quite convincingly, 13-6 on map number 1, 13-6 on map number 2. Metasport obviously qualified to the showdown, and back then that was the Giacchino, Adam B, Nilo, Susp, and ZTR roster versus Nork, Jacob, Stiko, Kakinito, and Sense. So I just think at the time it gave us a little bit of perspective of Metasport, pushed them to that higher degree. They obviously went on in the showdown to beat the likes of Falcons in their opening game and beat Monty in the next matchup. So just that one at the time, just seeing Metasport cause an upset, get themselves a good qualification, that to me just is a memory that sparks in my mind.
Yeah, look, it was the start, I think, of the whole Metasport revolution. I think the guys like, again, ZTR and Nilo standing out for being the captain and the respective star players of that roster, and then they, of course, went on to nearly make it into the Blast finals as well. Like, that showdown run, it all started with that regional masters, like you mentioned, and even that match was a shocking upset, because we went into that tournament saying, Metasport, yeah, they got some all right players, they shouldn't really be doing much against the established names of an Apex. I think 3D Max was in that tournament as well.
Well, Furia got grouped. I mean, the outset was Furia and Apex are going to be in the final together.
Yeah, I mean, there was just a lot of great teams in that competition, and Metasport stood out over them. So, again, good match, great storyline to follow up, and of course, it had ramifications for the later month or so for the Tier 2 Counter-Strike space.
Yeah, there was definitely building blocks off of that event and off of that match specifically. So, okay, your number 1 for best match of the year.
So we didn't cast this one.
Okay.
And I had a lot of question marks whether to count this event as a European event, and we'll get to that probably in another award later on down the road. But I picked Bleed versus Mongols at the MESA Nomadic Masters.
Best of 5 grand final?
The best of 5 grand final, 4 maps played, and every single map was absolutely close. I watched it live. I watched Tea Time giving his all throughout the course of that one. So hats off to you, my friend, if you're watching. It was just epic. It was epic. And I was obviously supporting Bleed because of my European roots, because I really wanted to see that team do well. And they weren't able to get the victory. But in terms of a roller coaster ride, again, so many 13-10s, 13-11s, every single map was close in that best of 5 final. It is the kind of series you want to see out of a best of 5 in my eyes.
Yeah. Well, my number 1 is not one that was a pro game, but one that I played in, Jay. I am going to go all the way back to the group stage of Epic 41.
Oh my God.
Binmen International versus the Bin Chasers. 23rd of February this year. A 3-hour best of 1 on Ancient. Just to give everyone at home a little bit of an understanding, pretty much all players on both teams love Pug and Ancient. It's been a historic map in the pool. So this was me, Penguin 5, Daemonic, Pej, and Whiskey versus Frosty 10, who's now got 2 matches on HLTV. O Tyler, Sai, Vilda, and Birdie. And it was just an honest, magical game. We had some tech issues. We had a player that even had to move his setup to go and play in the admin area to get the game done. I had a clutch of a lifetime of the 1v3 in OT, and ended up finishing 22-19. And we had people standing behind us watching it, and we slowed the entire group stage down because everyone was waiting for the seeds of our game to finish.
Trust you to pick the... I was expected to be the most troll one here today.
No, I picked myself.
You pick yourself?
Yes.
Wow, I can't believe you've done that. Was that much even streamed? Is there even like video footage of it?
There is a stream on our POV and the other team POV, but I was fuming that there wasn't the EPICLAN Twitch stream, because that would have actually been game of the tournament. That was insane. There were so many clutches. There were just so many insane rounds, and it lives rent-free. I will never forget it.
And I'm sure none of the other participants and all the other attendees at EPICLAN will forget it either.
Yeah. So that's all I've got on that one.
Fair enough. Okay, then. Next one.
Most improved player of the year.
Okay, I'm surprised they didn't group this in with the other player categories, but okay.
Yeah, I've given some separation just to get the trolling in early. I've actually picked a player that I picked last year, which was kind of surprising to me because I thought, can I pick a player 2 years in a row to be most improved? And I can. And I'm going to go with Matties out in Fnatic. Now, I gave him #1 in the category last year because I thought he stepped up his game massively on the Enterprise organization, moving into Sampi, and then getting the call up to Fnatic. I thought that it from year to year would seem more to more. And then this whole year was, okay, now that he's playing on a good team, can he hold it? Can he actually perform at that tier 1 level? And I think he can. I mean, I know Fnatic haven't been the strongest of teams this year, but you easily look at him as one of the best riflers. Now, obviously, since BlameF has joined, he's going to be basically the guy that the majority of people are looking at. But before BlameF joined, Matties was the best player on Fnatic. And since BlameF is there, now you've got a dynamic duo between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, he's a hell of a pick, I'll say. I mean, it did kind of slip the net from my eyes, actually, because I didn't even consider Fnatic in terms of any of my awards personally. It's a bit difficult to weigh up most improved player of the year, in my opinion, because of the nature of you just comparing last year to this year.
It's more so that he hasn't dropped off playing at that higher level.
Yeah,
because
okay.
they're playing LANs, aren't they? They're in the partner system, so they're playing with the tier 1 teams. And sometimes you see a really good tier 2 player can get that opportunity and just not really do much at that next level. He has consistently been the name of Fnatic. He has been, and people will say, one of the best pickups that Fnatic made last year. So to see that, to me, is an improvement that he's not only kept that same level, but even pushed the boundaries for what he can do at the tier 1 atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a very good pick. I'll say that much. And hats off to Matties. I think had I looked at the Fnatic players, I probably would have actually have gone with him, honestly.
But you can't pick BlameF, that's for sure.
I can't pick BlameF, no. So my second place actually was NPL as an improved player, because last year, obviously, they were kind of hanging around in the tier 2 environment. They had that RMR opportunity, didn't quite make it work all the way for them. And as a team, they sort of were kind of a bit middling, starting to push on a little bit. But NPL as an individual was okay in that 2023 team. He has been, of course, one of the players of the year in 2024. So I picked him because his numbers have obviously leveled up in a massive fashion. And I also looked at him in terms of the level in which Bait have also grown from last year to this year. So as an IGL, as a player, I think he beat out a head trick just by a small amount as well in terms of like the pick of the difference between the two Bait players. And as an improvement, I think he's just been leaps and bounds over how he was last year.
Yeah, I can accept that. Yeah, NPL's a good pick, and if I've picked him for one of my categories and you've done the same, then it tells you how strong of a year he's really had. Now, my #1 for most improved player of the year is going to be Nemana from Zero Tenacity. This is a guy that is so damn good that pro players think he cheats. Actual pros tweet radar gifs. They fully believe that he cheats. The in-game leader from 2022 had an 0.91 rating. In 2023, he goes to a 1.05, and this year, a 1.17. He is an incredible caller. Individually, he puts himself in start roles, and he's the best player on Zero Tenacity. So to work with the pieces that you've got, which is inexperienced players that have not played at a top-end Tier 2 level, and to work with a long-standing core, a long-standing roster, this year has been incredible for Nemana individually, and he is without a doubt my #1. Didn't even need to look into numbers for most improved player this year.
Look, he came into my picks and my shortlist for best breakout player of the year for very good reason. He has been sick, and he certainly has been one of the better elements, the best elements, if you will, of that Zero Tenacity side. In spite of all the allegations, I know that we were talking at the Relog office about like the admin standing behind them, making sure they weren't cheating, and still there were allegations when they had all those.
And when that happens, it tells you two things. Either players are salty, or secondly, they actually think you're really good.
Think about Rops.
Yeah.
Exactly. There you go.
They always try and beat it.
Yeah, I will say, if you're going to make allegations, come at me with some harder evidence. That's all I'm going to say on that particular front. Well, my #1 was very, very different.
Okay.
I went towards the direction of Saw, and I picked U-Jerks.
Okay.
Because of his surgence into the Tier 1 environment, doing well at events like IEM Cologne, competing at a lot of Tier 1 S-tier level of competitions over the course of the year. And again, his numbers have improved since last year with the Saw side. So to be able to have the statistical boost alongside a level up in competition, not always consistent in the level up of competition, but certainly having that level up regardless, I think for me, puts him down as one of the most improved players of the year.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next category. Biggest upset of the year. Now, there was quite a few. The way that I looked at it is I wanted, first off, LAN matches. I wanted to put it in that perspective to say, okay, I want more of the Tier 2 teams to be able to push for a win against tier 1 competition on LAN rather than online in the home environment as of such. So what's your second for this year?
Well, I actually went with 2 of the same team for this one.
Okay.
My second place was SAW beating G2 at IEM Cologne during the group stage. It was the opening game of Group A, and it was the biggest upset in terms of being a tier 1 event in terms of the ranking difference here. So I think SAW were just outside of the top 30 at the time, and G2 were within the top 10. So the ranking difference was huge in terms of that, and SAW, of course, embarked upon a huge run as a result of that. I do take into account ranking difference in terms of the upsets, but also in terms of the caliber of the match itself. So as we'll get to in a moment, it was my second place because it was a group game at the end of the day. Again, SAW, I think, had a little bit of a bigger upset later on down the road.
Yeah, but I'm actually going to go way back earlier in the year to February for my second, and that's going to be Amcal knocking out Falcons at the RMR. Now, to give you an idea, the previous tournament to the RMR was IEM Katowice, where Falcons made top 4. They went on a massive run, made it to the stage. They lost out to Spirit in the semis, who ended up winning the entire tournament. That game, where they got knocked out by Spirit, was the 10th of February. Where they got knocked out against Amcal at the RMR was the 16th of February. We are talking less than a week later after making top 4 at Katowice. You don't even make the major. You go 1-3 at the RMR. And this is Amcal out of all of teams. So I look at that one and think, what an upset that really is.
Yeah, I mean, I remember having that match on my shortlist, but I kind of like threw it away rather haphazardly because it was like, well, I mean, it's Falcons. It's not really like they are the best team in the tier 1 environment.
But back then,
you know,
it's different to where it is now, for sure.
You know what, thinking about it from back then in that perspective, yes, certainly. I think maybe my opinion was tarnished by the recent runs where not even Simple can dig them out of the hole that they're in at the moment. But look, it is an upset and a pretty significant one at that.
Yeah, you can go with your number 1.
Okay, cool. Well, as I said before, same team, same tournament. SAW beat FaZe at IEM Cologne in the top 6, the round of 6 quarterfinals. I don't know how you would describe that particular match in that phase of the tournament. It was during the playoffs. It was on the big stage. Man, what a game, by the way. I watched it live like I did with Mongols and Bleed, and I would say that I consider this to be a tier 1 match because it is at IEM Cologne, so it didn't make my cut in terms of my criteria. But if I had to pick between one of those 2 games, this one probably takes the cake in terms of match of the year with a tier 2 team involved. So
I mean,
it was a huge victory. Again, it wasn't the biggest in terms of the ranking difference because SAW's rank had improved coming into that particular matchup because of the run that they had during the group. But I just think about in terms of the stakes, in terms of the stage, in terms of the storylines involved with the veterans as well as the youngsters. I made a whole video about that on my YouTube channel. It was such a sick moment and such a sick upset that it again sticks out in my mind so significantly from this year.
Yeah, and I'd probably even debate you on the second one and say opening game versus G2. Look at what they just did at the Blast final where they get 13-0 in their opening game but win the tournament. So opening games to me don't mean a lot, but I've gone with SAW versus FaZe because not only is it a quarterfinal matchup, but it's on stage in an arena where none of these guys have played before in that sort of an environment. And I remember watching that game live. I mean, you go to OT in the third map decider, and the one round that I just remember and will never forget is the Muterus 1v4 that he has on Nuke. I mean, for an in-game leader on the stage versus FaZe to clutch like that is just crazy. And I think for SAW and for all of those players, that will be a memory remembered forever. That you do not get a better story than a Roman and a Muterus that have been playing together for so many years, grinding it in tier 2, tier 3, and then to beat FaZe on LAN in the arena. It's a magical moment.
It is, and again, it sticks out in I think a lot of people's minds. We talk about the Gamer Legion run from last year as being a moment that will never happen again. For SAW, that victory, that run, it will never happen again, and so it's special in my eyes.
Yeah, it is. Okay, well, best team of the year.
Okay, this was a challenging one, honestly, for me, because there were a lot of good teams. I had a short list of 4 squads that I sort of had to weigh up bits and pieces. I eliminated 2 very quickly, and then it was the first and the second teams that I was sort of like, oh, okay, how do I really factor in the achievements of these 2 squads? And I might piss you off with my second place, I'm going to be honest. I've gone in my second place with 3D Max. As the Frenchman. they've had a hell of a year. They've had a lot of great runs in the S tier appearances. They've had some opportunities at pro leagues and of those various natures, and they've even got a LAN title in the Skyesports Championship, and they've achieved so much in such a long space of time. I thought that my third place pick was Bait, just so you know. So again, I had to weigh them up. The Bait have had obviously a hell of a time during the later portions of the year. I think in terms of sustained success, theMAKKU have kept it going throughout the whole year. They've got a championship behind them, and they were edged out by my first place team, who we'll talk about in a little bit because of other performances elsewhere. So theMAKKU's my second place pick. I'd imagine you might disagree there.
Yeah, I'm going to go Bait for second. This is a side, again, top 4 at Espo, got to play on the stage, beat NIP and beat Yano. Okay, whatever. At least you're getting stage experience. I got to the grand final of ESL Challenger Katowice, where they beat Eternal Fire in a best of 1, and then Eternal Fire again in a best of 3. That's not easy. To do that in the groups against what is now a tier 1 team is a proper result in my eyes. They then went on to beat Pain in the semis. Pain's pretty decent too. They're probably a tier 1.5, maybe top end tier 2 team with how often they get to go to tier 1 tournaments. This is a Bait side that played in 6 grand finals this year. They won 5 of them. They stayed around the top 30 on HLTV basically from May to right at the end of the year. And I think, too, they got hurt by some roster changes. I mean, I'm thinking about earlier in the year, they bench Amster and they bring in Essential. Now, we cast a Bait around that time. Essential was just not known. It was a brand new player in the scene, had not played Pro CS at all. And then, okay, you start to embed yourself maybe towards that higher end of tier 2, and then Wrinkle gets picked up. And it's like, man, Wrinkle's our star AWPer. Yeah, they get Headtrick, and Headtrick eventually turns into being a very good piece for this team, but when you lose Wrinkle, it probably feels, okay, this is going to be a step back. We're going to have to grind it up again. And then there was a few more changes. Owner got benched. They bring in Alex, who used to play on Bait. And for a team that had made quite a few changes, I thought that they had a really successful mid to tail end of the year. So, yeah, I'm going to go for Bait. They're at the Shanghai EU RMR as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, they were my third place pick. They were extremely close for me between them and theMAKKU. It was just theMAKKU that edged them out because they've had a hell of a year over a longer period of time. And keep that Wrinkle and head trick move in the back of your mind for a later award. We'll get to that later. But my first pick, and again, I imagine you're probably going to disagree with me on this one, it was Saw. It depends how you define them. I know that some people call them tier 1.5, and some people might even look at them as a tier 1 squad for a little bit of time during the course of the year. Again, I think a totality of the year, they were majoritively a tier 2 team in my eyes. And it was because of the Cologne run, the multiple S tier tournaments that they got off the back of that Cologne run, and their boost in the rankings, enabling them to go towards even challenger events, a top 4 in Atlanta, a title win at Challenger Katowice as well. The very end of the year has been extremely strong for them, and it was even in the spite of other roster moves as well. They lost out on one man. They brought in Agil as well to bring up the 5-man unit and all the issues that surrounded the roster move in that respect, but they still found success in spite of that. So in my eyes, again, I look at Saw, I consider them as team of the year, and I'd imagine that you would also disagree with that as well.
Well, the only reason I disagree is because I don't look at them as tier 2 anymore. If I did, I probably would have put them as number 1. So for my number 1 team, it's your second, it's theMAKKU. This is a team that, again, not only made top 12 with Gravity just joining the team, but they beat Saw and Fnatic at that LAN and even took a map off of G2 with a brand new 5th player. So you think, okay, that's a decent start to the year. You win Skyesports Championship, beating Ents, Aurora, and Mongols in the playoffs. The grand final was just an own as well. Mongols didn't even fight against theMAKKU. They got completely destroyed. And then the next season of Pro League, you think, okay, we made playoffs last time. Let's use that as a bit of a par. They didn't quite do as well from the placing, but they beat Mongols, they beat 9Z, they beat Wildcard, and they took a map off of G2 and a map off of Spirit. I mean, that's then showing that they can contest against tier 1 squads. They've just placed 3rd at the Thunderpick World Championship, and they've never dropped out of the HLTV top 30 from May onwards. That is a long portion of time to be within that top 30 conversation. And as well, if we're looking at the online circuit, they're really consistent online. They don't often get upset, I would say, in playoffs. They might get upset in the group stage, main Swissers, whatever, but they are very consistent in tier 2. They're very good at driving into qualifications, and that's how they were at the Thunderpick World Championship. So, yeah, I put theMAKKU as my number 1.
Yeah, again, it's fair enough. It depends on the definitions at the end of the day. I define Saw as a tier 2 team. You don't, and so that's where I would pick them as my favourite.
Okay.
And look, that's really the one piece of criteria that we differentiate on that one. So other than that, it pretty much is the same thing. Because even I had Bait as my 3rd place team.
Yeah,
so.
and it tells you that there has been teams and players that you can look at quite easily there's a little bit of discussion again on what is tier 1, what is tier 1.5, what is tier 2. It's a very difficult fine line to follow. I would say Mongols have pushed themselves in the tier 1 conversation for me.
Yeah.
Eternal Fire have done the same. Sort, no, but tier 1.5. And probably as we get towards next year, then we'll start to bridge that gap a little bit more.
A little bit, but good luck defining it all with next year's rankings, because apparently, according to Valve number 9 in the world is a tier 2 team.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Right then, have we got best roster move next?
Yes, we do. And
Okay.
I've gone for a unique one for my second, but I want to start with your second for this.
Okay, I have cheated a little bit for my second one, I'm not
Here
going to
we
lie. Because it's not one roster move, it actually is a few of them, back-to-back for Gamer Legion. The additions of the rebuild of Slend and Flamus and ZTR and Torsun have slowly been able to get back into a place where they are contesting the higher end of the tier 2 space.
Okay.
I think that because they haven't been a core 5-man unit for long enough, which is why I didn't consider them in my Team of the Year awards, but because they have had some extremely good slow builds into multiple online finals at the end of the year, coming into the RMR with pure strength because of what they've been doing in the online environment, and I think having a lot of momentum behind them going into Shanghai. I think that, again, the recency of the moves do sort of make me put a little bit of a hamper on it. And again, I am cheating because it's not just one move.
No,
but equally, I think that has to be recognised for that.
I still think Gamer Legion has been quite mid this year. In my perspective, I don't think I see them as a threat in tier 2. Haven't seen them on LAN. I haven't seen them qualify to basically anything outside of the RMR. I know they've been pushing CCT Grand Finals, but I just think with Ash at the helm, with the players they've got, yeah, they've got some newer, more inexperienced pieces, so you have to give a bit of leeway to say it's not going to be comparable to the previous iteration. I could see Gamer Legion being a strong team in next year, and I could see them being a threat, but in this year, personally, they just haven't really impressed me as a squad.
I can get that. I think in the year in totality, they don't really make Team of the Year for me. I think that these roster moves have been strong at the very tail end of the year. They have done, as you mentioned, some good pushes in CCT. I think they went back-to-back second places in grand finals, and I think that gives them a lot of leeway when it comes to moving into the RMR, because a lot of the other tier 2 teams in the RMR conversation haven't exactly been quite as strong as making those multiple grand finals at the same time.
Yeah, it's very true. My second place, again, is a bit of a unique one. When I look at best roster move of the year, I don't think it has to be a team that makes a change that then is a top tier 2 team. It can be any squad that has found improvement of a decent degree because of a change. And I'm going to go with Passion UA. I'm going to go with getting rid of Mare 2K and adding in Fear as the in-game leader. Now, this was a Passion UA side that was ranked 122nd, or 126th, I should say, on HLTV at the time of that change. They were playing in back-to-back seasons of ESEA main. They were playing United 21s. They weren't even on real HLTV consistently. They've made that change. They've brought in an in-game leader that played in the Na'Vi Junior youth system, had a stint with playing with Smooya on the Witchers, and I actually think they've brought in Passion UA to a decent team in tier 2. Now, they're not a top tier 2 team. They have qualified to the RMR, but I think that change really pushed the boundaries of that squad of how far they could actually go for what is 5 basically completely unknown players.
Yeah, look, it is one of those things where, as you say before, it doesn't need to be a top-end tier 2 team. I did look at the top-end tier 2 squads first, which is where I came up with my particular shortlist for this one, but it is a very good move for Passion UA individually. I want to see if they can move a little bit further than that with these moves, because it's one of those things that ultimately holds me back when I think that there are teams in the higher echelons that have also made swaps that have strengthened up, and even though Gamer Legion may well be in the higher ends of that, and it still commands a bit of respect, I think, for a team like Bait to be able, Passion UA rather, to be able to do what they have done, because as you mentioned before, they weren't really much of a team prior to this year. So the fact that they've enabled themselves to become that, and then again, they're not a tier 2 high end, even a tier 1.5 squad, but they are making moves and they are pulling off some surprises.
I mean, if I'm going to use the conversation of Gamer Legion maybe don't have the players because they're young and inexperienced, you can say the exact same thing. Look at the Bait players. Look at how veteran some of those names are. Look at how we've seen other Ukrainian squads, even Favbet with Bondik and Smash and Jackie, guys that have played at tier 2 for several years. To have brand new faces in the tier 2 landscape, this for me, I was even thinking about months ago. I had it straight away to come in for the best roster move of the year. It is going to be second for me, but I think a very good one to at least get people familiar with who Passion UA are.
Yeah, keep an eye out on them in the coming few months, and maybe even the next year, of course. So we'll see how they fit into towards the tier 2 online landscape, because they are a team, I think, that can be a key threat in some regards. So My first place, I did talk about it a little bit earlier on, but I went with the bait swap from Wrinkle and Hedrick because Wrinkle was a hell of a player. You're right about that. He was an absolutely sick element. And considering how Hedrick wasn't doing all that great on NIP prior to that point, I was very worried that this would be a downgrade. But he came into his own very clearly. He wasn't happy at that NIP roster because he was, again, fighting for me and my attention between him and MPL, between who's the best player on that bait roster. And even though I can sort of regard both in equal fashion, and even the numbers might favour MPL by a slight margin, in terms of a roster move, it didn't feel like it should have worked at the time. It ended up being a sick one for bait.
And it's one of those that is kind of forced because you have to find an AWPer. When you lose an AWPer, you've gone for a bit of a trade, really, with NIP, and they've probably come out better. The team has improved and pushed for more since that change. Now, is that a correlation? It's difficult to know. If Wrinkle stayed the entire year, could it still be the same bait success? Maybe. I would say both players are very good, but you are right. The change has actually led to more success.
Indeed it has, and that's my first place pick.
Okay, well, my number one was not one that was forced by the team, but forced by the player, and that's Hadji stepping down from theMAKKU that allowed not only Gravity to join the team, but also Wasnik, the coach, who has played pro in the French scene at the lower levels, played on teams like Warthox and Ambush, Gen 1, played with Exorcist in the past too. And it was just one of those moves at the time where I think theMAKKU's players were probably a bit deflated. They got to the RMR at Copenhagen, went 1-3, pretty crap, like didn't really show very much, and Hadji probably said, sod this, I'm stepping down, I'm looking for a better team. And you go, geez, okay, that's an experienced, fairly consistent rifler. You brought in a brand new face, someone that's not played at this level before, and then you're at Pro Leagues. You're winning LANs. You're getting top threes. It has been a massive improvement to theMAKKU with that change in mind.
Yeah, I have to concur. It is a very sort of similar vein to the bait swap in that it was a roster move that it's like, oh, okay, this is quite a huge loss for bait. But in similar fashion, it is quite a huge loss for theMAKKU at the time. But I think that as the end of the year is shown for them, as the year in totality is shown for them, they've done extremely good things, and that is a very, very good first pick in my eyes.
And one thing I would like to add also before Wasnik joined as the coach is that Killazoo also got poached. So he got taken over to OG. So not only have you lost a veteran stable rifler, but you've also lost your coach.
Yeah.
So it was a couple of moving pieces, but yeah, if I'm going to put theMAKKU as basically team of the year, I have to look at the roster change that put them in that position.
Yeah, it's a very good point and valid argument to make. So
here we go.
Should we do the fun ones now?
I had so many shortlists for worst roster move of the year and the next category. I can't believe how many I had this time. Because last year I was really struggling. I found it really difficult.
I'm halfway asked to see what the rest of the shortlist was.
I didn't include it, so I took them out of my mind. But because obviously I've been doing this for the last few months, and I had about 5 or 6 other ones for this category, which is madness because it shouldn't be that many.
Yeah, there were a few bad moves this year, wasn't there?
Yes.
Therefore, I'm very curious to hear what you've got. For my second place pick, actually, I'm going to go for a little bit of a link into the last one because I said that the best move for bait was to swap Wrinkle and Hedrick on the other side of the board. What have NRP done ever since Wrinkle came in? It's not exactly been great for them. And I know that obviously...
But was it any better before?
It wasn't any better before, no.
But it's still not an improvement?
It's still not an improvement.
Okay.
And that's the thing, right? Because if you're going to make a change like that, you want to improve. And for NIP especially, they're a team that I'm going to start considering as a Tier 2 team moving into 2020, 2025.
I consider them right now as a Tier 2 team.
Yeah, I mean, look, just think about the fact that we're going to start going off the Valve World Rankings. We're going to start using that as a metric by which to judge squads, and the fact that they're not going to get invited to Pro League by default. They're not going to get invited to IEM by default. They're not going to get invited to Blast by default. It means that they need to make improvements. And this was a roster move that was forced out by them being the bigger organization and having the more resources and funds. But ultimately, they've been a quite mid squad over this year, and before and since that roster move.
I would debate you on that one because Wrinkle is the best player on that team. So is it the move of him or is it the move of everything together? It's a difficult boundary to say. I mean, you can use the argument, well, if you were that good, then you'd be pushing for wins, but you also can't just be an unbelievable superstar. I will say that Wrinkle's performed at a decent level for NIP, but you are right. It has been a tough little while Fan IP, to say the least.
Yeah. All right. Well, your second place pick.
My second place, and there is quite a lot of backlog to this, quite a lot of story, is going to be minus McGill's and plus Crunchy for the True Rippers. Now, I'm going to give yourself a little bit of a time window. You and I, we were out in India casting the Skyesports Championship tournament, which was towards the end of July this year, okay? And they nearly beat the Mongols, and they nearly beat Bleed. They actually made quite a statement at that tournament, I would say. For a team that, come on, let's be real, they shouldn't be beating anyone. They've actually made quite a statement. Now, end of July is the tournament. 7th of August, about a week after the tournament, McGill's is kicked. I'm like, okay, it's a bit weird. 1 week after the tournament, you've actually done quite well. You're being kicked. You signed Crunchy, who's played Valorant in North America for the last few years. 4 days after they've signed Crunchy, Rotti takes over the in-game leadership over Defaulter. I'm like, okay, so this is... What's going on here? We're getting quite a few changes. Now... The 28th of... Okay, so I'll go back a little bit. 24th of August is when they get Crunchy and then the in-game leader swap. 4 days later is the Asia RMR closed qualifiers. We are talking about a short time window from the LAN finishing to the RMR, and True Rippers, they ended up doing quite shit. I casted a few of their games. They didn't look good at all. They ended up placing 3rd. And I just think after such a decent tournament, why would you make changes moving into what is the most important qualifier of your entire year to basically be, can you be a squad that can make it to the RMR? After the RMR closed qualifiers, they end up getting rid of Crazy Gamer, they end up getting rid of theMAKKU, they get rid of their coach, and then McGill's comes back, and it's like, what's going on? How have they got rid of him, and then he's come back? And we did a Tier 2 talk episode, me and Ryan, about True Rippers after the championship, and we were kind of toying them up to be like, are you the #1 team in India? And they're saying, yes, we are. We are better than God's Reign. Since Skyesports Championship, they have lost to God's Reign in every single match. 4 in a row, qualifications, on LAN, they've lost to God's Reign. And then, here's Rossi's comment, right, on a Dust2 India article. After acquiring YB and seemingly heading in the right direction, this is the question, the team now finds itself without a coach. Is True Rippers currently searching for a new coach? And Rossi says, no, we are not looking for any new coaches at the moment. Why? Why are we not looking for a coach? Why have we just said, nah, we don't need one? And then we're recording this 5th of November, 1:30 this afternoon. Yesterday, on the 4th of November, report is God's Reign to sign Rossi. What is going on at True Rippers? Who is making these decisions?
It's like that Channel 4 news anchor. What on earth is going on in the House of Commons?
Actually this.
So I appreciate that's a hell of a story and a hell of a pick right there. I have one issue with it, like that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. But I think at the same point, I have to kind of categorize this as a team that's been qualifying 2 LANs that are going to be in Europe and CIS. You are right. Like, for the most part, I tried to disclude those kind of countries. But considering we were there in person, considering we saw the team in its own account, I decided to include them. But you are right.
Oh, nice that I'm not the only person that's bending the rules a little bit here on this show. So, right then. My first place pick, and I don't know how this one's going to go down.
Okay.
But it was the one that I thought was the worst one from an organization, and that was, of course, BC Games' pickup of Joel from earlier on this year.
Is that a bad pickup? Because Joel is an insane player.
Yeah, he was an insane player. You're right about that. But he was the guy that was caught out for cheating. And as suspicions for many, many years, a lot of people wanting to distance themselves from this player because of the...
Godsend benched him because of it.
Godsend benched him because of the allegations. And it ends up that BC Game end up making it such a true effort. And it's like, why would you take that risk if he is such a hot... potentially like controversial individual because of that? It ends up being true. It turns out
well, some teams got to pick him up. Like, there's no way every team in Tier 2 is going to say, no, we don't want Joel.
Some teams are going to, but in this case, it was BC Game that picked him up at the moment that he got a banned, and we saw what happened with that as a result. And
that's fair enough.
I look at that just being a case of, in hindsight now, like, you probably wouldn't do that if you are BC Game. I don't think they should have done it to begin with. The whole EPIC thing was very, very incredible. incredulous, and I wasn't really sure what to make of that at the time, and now I definitely do.
Yep.
In that the whole thing was a complete farce of his whole unbanning, because he was caught out now on betting offences, which got overturned, a cheating offence that will now no longer be overturned. I don't imagine Acros deciding to go back on that, even with legal action. This is one of those cases where I think that maybe if he wasn't caught out, maybe if he continued on, he wasn't banned, I wouldn't be considering it.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is he was, and BC Games suffered the consequences for that.
No, fair enough. I'd agree with you. I'm really surprised that you didn't include this one, though. My number one, easy one, is Metasport benching Susp and ZTR. At the time, Metasport were top 30 on HLTV. They qualified to the Blast Showdown. They beat Falcons. They beat Monty. They took a map off of Spirit. Why are those players being benched?
Do you know what? I completely agree with you, but I put them in a different category.
Yeah, I wonder why. This at the time, and I remember, because we were casting quite a lot of Metasport earlier in the year, and especially the Susp move, more so than the ZTR, Brett, there was players on the team of Metasport that were actively quote tweeting that, saying that they were surprised. And I'm just thinking, if the players think that, that's got to be a bad move. Again, there are moments I think a GM needs to take over, and you can't let the players run the show. But with how well the team was performing, for Susp to just be benched and your in-game leader to be benched when you've cracked that top end of Tier 2 after great achievements in the first few months of the year, it seems ludicrous to me, and that is why it is easily the worst move of the year.
Yeah, look, I can't disagree with you. Again, I only didn't put it down because I have another category in which I featured Metasport in. So, should we move on to that one then?
Let's move on to it. Worst managed team. I wonder where they're going to pop up again.
This is a new category for this year, which you came up with after being frustrated with my second place pick, that being alternate attacks, because Christ on a bendy bus, this squad, I got so sick and tired of seeing them, because it was the same old story every time. They play in every tournament and every match, and they have a match list and a tournament finish list that goes on for pages and pages, and they just did absolutely nothing with it at all. They were constantly on the grind, and they had nothing to show for it, and they had so little to show for it that even you and I were saying they should take some time to actually practice and improve. Yeah. We weren't seeing the improvements. They were playing officials, and I know that players oftentimes say that the practice is less impactful than the official matches in the Tier 2 environment, because you get to actually put your strategies into play against teams that are taking it seriously. Equally, though, I see things that if you're not practicing enough, you're not taking the chance to critically analyze your own gameplay and take the necessary steps to make improvements. And that's my ultimate issue with alternate attacks. They never, in my eyes, took that chance. And then what happened earlier on, was it last month or so, was it? They announced that they're shutting down the roster and it's not going anywhere. And it just goes to show that all of that time, all of that grind, all of that effort, all of those tournaments are a complete waste of time.
Yeah, but I would debate you on that one, and I disagree on that one. I actually feel for the players here on alternate attacks. Let's.
It's not a player's thing.
No, you're right.
It's not a player's thing. The way that I see it is that the management have got to choose whether or not to allow them to play in those particular tournaments. The players might want to say, yes, let's play in as much as possible, but it's got a point where you as a GM or a coach or a CEO or anyone who looks at the situation just goes, let's change tact, boys, because it ain't working.
I will say, though, let's say the results are different in the grinding mentality. If they can push for more wins, they push their Valve ranking higher, they probably survive for next year.
Possibly.
So
then, again, in my eyes, I think that they had at least a chance to do that if they took some time to practice.
See, I would disagree, because with the circuit right now, especially this year, moving into the Valve ranking with how important prize pool is, almost every squad in Tier 2 is going to basically do what alternate attacks is doing, because taking time off means less chances of creating prize pool. It's going to be a fine line, and you are right, it does come down to a managerial perspective to make that decision, but I think for alternate attacks, I didn't consider them in this category. I know it's worse managed rather than team performances and players and what have you, but I think next year you're going to see a lot of Tier 2 teams grinding, because they'll know how important it is to get that ranking, and it's the only way to do it is to play just a shit ton of officials without basically any prac at all.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that in terms of the here and now, it wasn't the right decision to make. And obviously, they suffered the consequences for that. The team no longer exists. I don't even know if the org exists right now.
Well, I mean, unfortunately,
if they do, then there's a lot of question marks around that at the moment, I'd say.
Even the players, I mean, I don't know. They have to go to international projects unless they try and stick together to go to another org. But who? I mean, outside of big and alternate attacks, you just don't, unless there's German orgs in other games that I'm not aware of. It's a very small scene at that higher end. So I wish the best to all the players because I think they're in a very uncomfortable state with basically losing Slacks at the end of last year and losing Spiddy to retirement to use the whole year to basically rebuild and end up, after all that hard work, to just basically be left by the wayside.
Well, there we are. My second place pick. What's yours?
Mine is going to be Rhino, the Portuguese organisation. Now, I'm going to start again with a bit of a story here. I was really shocked to see Rhino invited to the EU RMR closed qualifier. We were talking about it at the time
actually.
because of their Valve ranking. And one of the main reasons they actually had a good enough Valve ranking was that they placed second in one of the rest European series, and they basically beat dogs to the final. Like, it wasn't a stacked tournament at all. They had a really easy run. I think they had Rebels in their opening playoff game, and then Spiro was standing in, and then the next game was Cybershock. And it's like, come on, like, you're not beating good teams to be into a grand final. So that's sort of the outset of it. I was surprised to see them there in the first place. Now, a bit of a time window. EU RMR closed qualifier started on the 23rd of August. Now, we're going to go back about a month or so. June, they parted ways with a Retono Hacks, who basically was a player on the team, ended up retiring, which brought Agil into the roster. So 1-for-1. And then the player that retired ended up being the new head coach. And it's like, okay, so was a player, stepped down for a bit, now he's come back. Now, 4 days before the EU RMR closed qualifier starts, the coach steps down. Who does that? Who steps down before the most important tournament of the year? And this was a tweet. Now, again, this is translated to English, so it might not be word for word. But I decided to leave Rhino as a coach. Honestly, it's not what I intended to do, nor do I think I can contribute in the best way. I wish the best of lucks in the upcoming tournaments, and may they continue on their good journey. Now, fair enough if coaching's not for you. But why would the organisation say, mate, you can leave? Let him leave after the EU closed qualifier. At least have someone in that coach slot for a really important tournament. Anyway, at the RMR, they didn't really do too well in the closed qual. They upset Gamer Legion in their opening game. They had a couple of tight losses against Bleed and Unity. They lost out to Bait in the 1-3 game, basically, to get knocked out. Now, that game was the 23rd of August, okay? Now, 3 days later, they part ways with two players. They basically just kick TMKJ and Diaz. You're like, okay, maybe a bit of a tilt, right? They've done pretty shit at the RMR closed qualifier. They need some new faces. They bring in NoPJ, who we've cast a little bit in Tier 2. We know him. And this Piera guy, didn't know him, okay? 1 day later, they bring in a new head coach. It's like, okay, got some newer faces, got a new coach. 3 weeks later, they got rid of NoPJ and they got rid of Piera. Bro, what? Like, you just signed 2 players and they're gone after 3 weeks. So they bring TMKJ back, and it's like, okay, you're bringing in a player you got rid of. Whatever. You bring in Rafax, and then Agil goes to Saw. We spoke about it a little bit earlier on with the step down. And then OPJ is back again. It's like, what is going on? So that's gotta be.
Out, shake it all about.
How is that not worst managed? I mean,
yeah,
because just the idea of a coach leaving before such an important tournament, for them to be full tilt and to be making changes after that tournament, I just think it was diabolical. Just an absolute disgrace from Rhino.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was quite a tale. I'll tell you that. That was, yeah, my counter to that probably would be the fact that Rhino probably aren't expected to be a high-end Tier 2 team at the same time. So, like,
but you've got to prepare yourself the best possible for the EU RMR closed qualifier.
You do. You're right about that.
Look who made it. Unity. EPICLAN. Mate, if those teams could make it to the RMR, then Rhino could do it.
Well, I mean, yes, but equally, though, as you said before, probably don't look at them as being a team that's within a conversation to do much in any way.
No, I agree.
And in that particular, I don't even think they should have been invited to the RMR.
No, I don't think so either. No.
So it's like, okay, fine, it's a bit of a shit show, but it's in a shit show that's like not as significant towards the Tier 2 space in my eyes. What is a significant shit show in the Tier 2 space, and I have a feeling that you have the same first place pick as well, is the Metasport worst managed team in the Tier 2 environment. And I know that you're going to go down to history in a moment here. Actually, you know what? Why don't you go down to history first? So you can just give everyone a little inkling as to what Metasport did to earn this particular shameful award.
Yeah, so just to go through some of the roster changes, again, had a really good first few months of the year. It gets to May time, and they bench Sus. Bit of a surprise, but okay, whatever. You bring in Plopsky, who stood in for Nilo in that Get Rio LAN tournament in Brazil. And then basically after a few days of Plopsky joining, ZTR gets benched. You think, okay, that's a bit weird. Like you're benching an in-game leader, whatever. You bring in Sapek and you go, Sapek's not an in-game leader. So you've benched an IGL and you haven't brought in an IGL. And then there's this full Twitter post about how Plopsky's going to be the new in-game leader. And you think, so a guy that's never done it before, when you had an in-game leader, there's in-game leaders around. Robin, out on Alliance, he's on the bench, available. At the time, Golden, also available. That there are in-game leaders in the scene that were applicable to join this Metasport team. Didn't end up happening. You then have Giacchino stepping down. Now, to be fair, I want to discourage this because it was sort of like a mental health issues, personal
this
issues. This
all excludes him specifically.
Definitely, okay? But that is just the time window that we're talking about. That happened in August, which means Lumi joins the team. Now, you probably don't have that many options available right now. I think that's a fairly good change, honestly, bringing a newer face, bringing a new person. But you've basically gone from getting rid of all of these more veteran pieces, and you're just getting newer faces that aren't prepared for this top-end level of Tier 2. October, you get Sapek finally being benched, then Shine coming in. And I actually watched a Talk to Thorin episode. This was recorded on the 15th of October, and this was Ash basically being on the podcast.
Yeah.
And Ash quoted this. We've had a steal picking up this guy. I can't really understand how we got him for as cheap as we did, and I can't understand him how we really got him at all. He's talking about getting ZTR from Metasport.
Yeah.
This is Ash saying, we can't believe we got him. If he's saying that, then why is he benched in the first place?
See, that's the part that makes it the worst thing possible, because, like, you've benched him. You've clearly said you got him for a steal, so, like, you've got him for very, very cheap.
Yeah.
And obviously, this is the leader that brought Metasport as far as they did during that Blast run, and you have completely fumbled the bag here. I don't know. Is it Zevez is the general manager?
Yes. Yeah.
Zevez.
Ex-pro player, used to play in the Norwegian scene. Yeah.
Zevez, I know you're better than this. Come on, man. What the hell happened here? This was such a as I said before, a complete shit show that I honestly think dismantled one of the rising squads that we had in the Tier 2 environment. I was looking forward to a bright future, even if, like, I would sympathize if ZTR was picked up by Gaming Legion, bought out, he wasn't benched, he was just sort of snatched away with an offer you can't refuse, and then you have to fumble around and try and fix something up and it doesn't quite work out. That's one thing. To bench him, to remove all these pieces, to bring up guys that clearly aren't ready for the top-end Tier 2 environment, when you had a team that stunned the world for all intents and purposes, that is just such a fucking fail in my eyes.
I will say, and if this is any credit at all in terms of positivity for Zevez, that he's made aggressive changes this year. I think there's a lot of GMs out there that let the ship ride for a little bit before change. To bench Susp and ZTR when the team is on a high is a tough change, maybe similar to what VP did after they just made the major to make that change. It's an aggressive move, but when it doesn't work, when you make that change and it's not successful, you are going to get bombarded.
Yeah.
You are going to be looked at and scrutinized for that move. I mean, Metasport at the end of March were top 30 on HLTV. They now sit at the time of recording at 86th in the world. They've been to one LAN this year, which is Get Rio, where they got invited. They didn't even need to qualify to that tournament. They lost to Imperial. To be fair to them, they did have a stand-in. They didn't have Nilo, but they lost to Imperial, lost to Furia, went out in last place, and they've got this Svensken Kupin event coming up soon. They've also been invited to that one. They have not qualified to a single LAN this year.
No, and again, it just goes to show exactly how far the fall from grace has been. You mentioned, I think it was 28, was their top placement at the tail end?
I think it was about 27, 28, somewhere around there.
Just inside the top 30 to now just inside of the top 80, top 90 or so. It's like, man, that is a huge, huge drop. And they can only blame the management, the organization of that particular right. And you talk about aggressive moves. Aggression only works when it needs to be required. I don't think an aggressive shift in the roster was required out of this particular side. Like, I know that the players weren't necessarily bound for longevity, and I don't think that they would have done well without ZTR, because if that roster move was inevitable, then I think that there would have been some more problems down the road for them in terms of the short term. But the fact that he went before those problems cropped up, the fact that they made so many sweeping changes, and not all of them by their own virtue, but a lot of them still to change up when players were even tweeting at the time, like, I don't know why this is happening. It's such a confusing mess of a shift in the squad. And aggressive roster moves work when you're a team spirit and you've got these incredible players in your academy side, and you know you need to make sweeping changes in order to survive the next wave of competition. They don't work when you've got something that at least somewhat works, and you need to just get something to build it back up to a point where it will work again.
I will say this is a perfect avenue for someone of Zevez to come on and speak to either you or like for me, maybe come on Tier 2 Talk, because I think you'd like to get perspective on why this is even a thing. A lot of the time in CS, we're only looking off of results. We're only looking off of roster chip. We don't have that insight on why certain changes are being made. So yeah, this is a bit of a call out to Zevez. I'd like to have a chat. I'd like to be able to actually get some insight in, because if we've both put it as worst managed team of the year, that can't be a good look for Metasport as an organization.
No, and look, Tier 2 Talk, I'm sure, is always open to having a chat. I'll even be a guest on this so I can pose my own questions.
Just anything. Yeah. There's a lot of... Again, I personally really only like to speak to players and coaches, but in this isolated example, I think hearing from a GM and someone that makes those moves would actually be something that I would really be involved upon.
Well, as it stands right now, Metasport, worst managed team of the year.
Yep.
Undoubtedly. Agreed. One of the 3 points we've agreed on so far. I think,
we've had a few, but... Solid ones. Solid. Now, most disappointing team of the year. There was quite a few in my eyes. My shortlist for the first point was going to be 500. I think really disappointing year. Had a bit of an uptake in form as of late, though.
Yeah,
so,
they were in my top 2 until they started to have that recent rise, and I'm going to hold out on them just to see where they go there. So at least that's another thing we also agree on.
And then another one was going to be Bleed as well, but I suppose with all of the circumstances.
Story. I also had them shortlisted for worst management, but I was kind of like, well, you know.
Can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
What is your second most disappointing team of the year?
My second most disappointing team of the year is 9, actually.
Okay.
We had a discussion about this on one of our green rooms back when we were doing one of the online shows for like Hellcup or Compass, and we were doing 9, and I was sort of like, I'm not very charitable towards this squad because you've got some very sick pieces here. You've got some players that have had Tier 1 titles with previous rosters, Tier 2 well placed within the Danish scene, within the international scene, within the French scene, and they come together on this roster. I'm thinking, man, this is a squad that can really do some damage, and this is a squad that could really find some hype around them. And they just haven't really done that, to be honest. They haven't hit the same levels of the high notes of the Tier 2 space. And I know that doing an international project is not going to work on the first go over, but equally so, they haven't really done much to actually make those changes and to make those improvements and to find where those issue points are that have disabled them from being able to make it to the kind of level that guys like on that roster should be able to make.
Yeah, I would debate on that one to say team only formed in May rather than the beginning of the year, so you're only looking at a smaller sample size. And again, EU international teams are very hard. They take time, they take changes. We saw that with what happened with Bleed, we've seen it with OG, we've seen it with Gamer Legion. When you get a core over, it's a bit easier, but starting from scratch, I don't personally think 9 has been disappointing. I just think they've been average. And that's my perspective on that team.
Okay.
So my second place team, which I'm surprised didn't prop up, was actually going to be Alliance. Now, this is a team that came together September last year with what is quite a big org name, Alliance, in other titles. They fielded Bodemaster, Pleasant, Robin, Avid, and Twist. So some decent names in Tier 2, guys that we've seen at Tier 1 levels in the past, top-end Tier 2 teams. Again, they've made some changes this year. They brought in a new head coach in January of Hawk. They benched Robin, the in-game leader, in July. They brought in Uppy, one of the young up-and-coming players in the Swedish scene that was most recently playing on Viperio. But I just haven't done anything. I think it's been quite disappointing for a team of players that we recognize. Maybe the odd top 4, maybe the odd grand final, maybe the odd deeper run. They just really haven't achieved anything. They've won just over $6 grand in prize pool, which is quite a low number in an entire year. I actually thought they looked okay towards the tail end of last year. Been really disappointed with them this year. I think it's been a rough 2024. And then I mentioned it on broadcast only the other day when we were talking about Johnny Speeds. Alliance have just announced a 1-year extension of contracts.
Yeah.
So you've got a team that's been incredibly disappointing, that haven't achieved anything at all, and they've just been given another lifeline. And I'm sure for all of these players, they know that results aren't good enough. They know that we need to be pushing for more, and I'm hoping for a more successful year next year for them. But yeah, very disappointed with what Alliance did this year.
Yeah, it's that 1 year extension part that baffles me, because if you're Alliance, surely you're looking at Johnny Speeds and thinking to yourself, there's at least some parts we can take out of this roster that are completely available on the market. I know that 2 of the players are on loan, so to speak, within the team itself, but it's like, man, Alliance, guys, like, because you were right, at some point we were looking at them saying, okay, this is a very intriguing little project, and it just hasn't really been good.
Yeah. Not even middle of the pack tier 2. I think they've been a low tier 2 team this year.
Tier 3 even, like not very good at all. So yeah, not so fun for them. I can't disagree with that particular notion. I definitely went down a very different path in terms of my disappointing teams in my first place team. And I know you're definitely going to disagree with this based on what you just said about 9, but I just want to really put the foot in at this point on Guild because it's just what a fail. I mean, my note here says exactly what I said to you on Discord once upon a time, which is just the acronym for Guild: giving underperforming players loads of dosh. There you go. It's a good
one.
Like, what the hell was this about, man? And I know it kind of carries on from last year equally, so it kind of is. I think I might even had Guild down as my disappointing team last year as well, so it kind of is a bit of a repeating performance. But I just really this was the year where it all really fell apart, and finally it was recognised. And it was a project that very clearly had ramifications in terms of Guild as an organisation as well, because they're also in liquidation at the same time. So it's not just a team that they've also been disappointing, it's the organisation itself. I mean, hell, you could put them down as worst managed organisation as a category on the shortlist there for as well, because it wouldn't just extend towards Counter-Strike, it extends to the whole of esports basically. And I have to say that it was just a big old waste of time, unfortunately. There were some matches throughout this year. I remember during the Skyesports, was it the Masters qualifier we did? And they were sat there and they were playing against VP Prodigy. That was it. Yeah, a really low-level tier 2 team and academy squad, and they had like a 10 to something lead, and then they just blew it. It was like 12, 11 rounds in a row where VP Prodigy just went whoop, and they won the map. They took it 2-0. It was that's just one example that sticks in my mind of just like, wow, that was awful. And this team, at the end of its life, they became awful.
Yeah, I would say they're not disappointing to me because they were disappointing last year. That's the way I look at it. What did piss me off, though, on Instagram is seeing the players on boot camp going to bloody Arsenal and taking photos. It's like, mate, when you get in the prep room, like, when you not go to the football game and get a bit of a move on. But yeah, to me, really disappointing last year, so I didn't even think about them this year at all.
That's so disappointing you didn't even have in your mind.
No, not at all. Maybe so. My number 1 team is going to be a team close to home, is Endpoint. Endpoint's done nothing this year at all. This is a squad that, to be fair to them, they have had some changes that's maybe pushed it down to this sort of marker. Heavy God got picked up by OG earlier on in the year. They brought in Switcher. We casted Switcher in quite a few series. Didn't really hold. Wasn't a star player. Wasn't a one-for-one comparison at all. He struggled. Slend ends up getting picked up by Gamer Legion. Okay, you lose a strong AWPer, but you actually return with someone that you're very familiar with. You bring in Crucial. Max and Surreal have played with him for a very long time. They've had some good achievements with him too. And they also bring in Seajot, who I haven't rated massively, but he looked okay on Sprout. I think they needed an anchor player, so okay, you're moving some pieces. They parted ways with their head coach, Frog, in August, and then they've brought in Holmes since that point. And I just think for a core 3 of Surreal, Max, and Crucial, you can even throw a Zulu in there, the core 3 that's been together for basically coming up to close to over a year, 14, 15 months. Their highest HLTV ranking this year was 51st in the world. They had a grand final and Hell Cup that we were extremely surprised that they made it that far. And the one that got me the most was the second place in the Rest European Masters, which was the British and Irish qualifier, where they lost out to Verdun. And you just think, if you're losing in the domestic matchups, if you're not even the number 1 team in the UK in those domestic games, that's a worry. That's a really big concern. And they've won about 25 grand in prize money, which is very low for a team of Endpoint's caliber.
Yeah, I'll admit that I'm not as thrilled about that pick personally. I just think that Endpoint have got a reputation reputation in the last couple of years for being the ultimate tier 2 feeder team, if you will.
It's true.
They've had players come up. You mentioned the Heavy God and Slen moves up to OG and Gamer Legion, and those guys are currently on, well, Gamer Legion obviously for Slen, but even Heavy God now currently on Cloud9 and everything. Like, they've had some very good movements in terms of upward trajectories, and other players throughout their history have also included the likes of MHL, who went to Falcons for a little bit, Nerds to Ents, you know, Flamesy, Boros, Mezzy, loads and loads of cool people that have come through their system. So in terms of results, I sympathize with that particular assessment, but I think as Endpoint as an organization have moved forward, I think that they've sort of found an identity less as a team to be contested with, less as a team to be a top-end tier 2 squad.
Well, that's not what Pete wants.
I know that's not what Pete wants.
Well, but then that is got to be disappointing.
Actually, that is not what Pete wanted back when I last spoke to him about
when I spoke to him, well, no, I spoke to him, and he doesn't want to be a feeder team. He wants Endpoint to be a top-end team. And this is me talking with him at the UKIC-LAN finals at the end of last year and at the Endpoint summer party. So we're not talking about a long time.
Well, then maybe that begs the question why he keeps selling his players then. Like, if you're not going to keep those guys around.
Well,
I know that it's not always as viable an option for a
You can't just not.
squad.
When someone comes, you can't hold on to them. The player wants to go, basically. But I just think with this year, with the players they've got, I mean, it's not a bad team. You've got Max as an in-game leader for a very long time, and maybe that puts into question, does he deserve to be the in-game leader of this team next year? Because he hasn't achieved anything with this roster.
Yeah.
Is it time to look at that duo of Surreal and Max that's been here since the very start of 2020? I know Max has got stints before that, but to be here for coming up to 5 years, is it time to move on? Is it time to look at this year and say, do you know what? Shit year, we need something new. And I know they've got some newer faces. They've got Cjot in there. They've got Homs in there. But Azubu's been here for a long time. Crucial's been in the lineup previously. I just think it has been a really disappointing year, a really hard year to push for a result, and it's not good enough for the players on this organization.
I mean, yeah, even looking at the lineup, I don't know if any of these 5 are going to get called up to another team anytime soon.
I mean, none of those players you would expect are going to join a top tier 2 team or a tier 1 point. Offers aren't coming to those guys.
Yeah, I don't know. It just... Something feels wrong about this particular pick.
I mean, even looking at some of the changes, I know in the past they've picked some like really strong star players in FPLC, higher end sort of free agents. Well, where are those kind of players? Where's like a Red Star to try and get into this team? Where's maybe a Hahn to try and push the boundaries? I think that they've been quite average with the changes this year. I think that they could have pushed a bit more with some of those free agents. And maybe that comes down to some of the scouting. I know Ross R was there in the past. Now that he's not there, is that a factor to maybe not having the best of scouts on looking at players?
I mean, their team manager, I think, is near them at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, but he only joined recently, to be fair to him.
Oh, April 2024. Oh, it's been a while, actually.
But,
so.
I mean, the changes only got made in April of the player changes.
I don't know if he's necessarily like I think it's more scouting individual.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly.
I don't know his particular background as what his role is within the team. I mean, certainly they have had better rosters in the past. That much is no doubt about that.
I just think that Endpoint, they need to be pushing for a lot more. They were, for, 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, considered a top-end team in Tier 2. Yeah, there were portions where they were maybe pushing for Tier 1 tournaments and they were sort of top 30, but you'd always consider Endpoint at least towards that higher end of Tier 2, and I haven't at all this year.
Well, I can't deny that much at the very least here, Dweg, so let's leave that nomination, that pick where it is, and move on to our next award. So, best run in the Tier 1 event?
Yeah, so this one doesn't normally have to mean best of placements. It could just be beating some good teams in a LAN environment, whatever. So what's your number 2 for best run?
So my number 2 is where we're going to get back into the Eternal Fire conversation, because I picked them at the Copenhagen Major. Now, earlier on I did say that the year in totality, I think that Eternal Fire have been a Tier 1 team for longer. Prior to this run, I think that they were still a Tier 2 team. I think this was the one that turned them into being Tier 1 expectations and eventually finding their form in terms of their other tournament runs that they've had as of recently. So, and it was a pretty decent run, right? They beat Gamer Legion during the opening Swiss stage. They had Vitality on the ropes. They beat FaZe. They beat VP in a best of 3 as well. They pushed Na'Vi all the way in that quarterfinal match, but it was a 2-0. It's still like some very close map-ups involved in that particular run. So Eternal Fire really turned heads at the Major, and that was like the Tier 2 run of the Major, if you will.
Yeah, well, I'm going to back that up with my second place with the Sangul, with some Turkish players. Now, 17th to 20th at ESL Pro League doesn't seem like the best of placings, but beating FaZe in your opening matchup, 13-2'd them in the opening map. I mean, that's quite a statement for a team that doesn't come to LAN very frequently. Got a good result. They ended up, again, beating FaZe. They beat Heroic. They lost to FaZe in the rematch, but still took one map of Anubis to 11-13. So even in a loss, you're still going the distance against FaZe. They beat FlyQuest 2-0, some close maps there, and then lost to Heroic in the rematch, and then yet again another map 11-13. I thought this Pro League run was incredible, that you can beat well-established teams and actually hold weight at a Tier 1 level.
Yeah, I think if they pushed towards the playoffs, they would have pushed that in as like the deepest Tier 2 run, like the best one.
I think it's just difficult that you have to rematch FaZe and rematch Heroic. You beat them once, and then you've got to play them again to try and push for the playoffs. It's not easy. They didn't get the easiest of draws, I would say, to push for the playoffs.
Yeah, my fear with that second place is the fact that I don't think people are going to remember this one because it was only 17th to 20th.
Probably.
If it was a playoff run, I think that actually everyone would look at that and say, okay, that was actually pretty legit from the Sangul side. And they are also a team that have done some great things over the last few months, and I'm looking forward to seeing if they can carry that on towards the next year as well. So I think number one is pretty objective, though. I feel like that we're both going to have the exact same thing. Have you also got Slaw at IEM Cologne?
Indeed, I do.
Yeah, I mean, I've already glazed over it earlier on the today. What a run this was, and what a story it was, and what a set of teams they had to beat as well for it. Beat out G2 in the opening game, as I said before.
Well, let's go to the play-in. Let's go even before that. I mean, it has to be Mongols and big.
And they beat them again during the group stage as well, right? Like, that was just such a ridiculous, like, even considering, like, some of the other runs, like I even looked at the Eternal Fire one at Pro League where they went to the Grand Finals. Group stage wasn't all that tough, really. They had some very lay-up squads, I think, in that particular group, whereas this one, it was just difficult from the word go for Saw, and then the FaZe matchup, everything around that. Lost the Vitality in the semis, but that's also Vitality who won the whole thing at the same time, and definitely the best team in the world at that time, at that moment. So the fact that Saw made it even against them, the fact they even made it that far, tip my hat to you. Like, truly, like an excellent run that defines what the Tier 2 magic is all about.
Yeah, definitely. And to me, there isn't a team that even comes close to that kind of run this year. So easy number one choice for best run in a Tier 1 tournament. Okay, best tournament of the year.
Oh, wow, I had to think about this one quite a little bit, actually. I even had to... I didn't make this pick until I didn't finish this category up until last night because we had Thunderpick, of course, happening this past one weekend. I wanted to see how that went down. I wanted to see what the vibes were like in the, in that venue. It's not really an arena per se, but that little level global gaming arena thing they have in Berlin, to try and figure that out. And I was kind of weighing that up. I was looking at other tournaments like the MESA Nomadic Masters, which I did count in this particular one, even though it's held in Mongolia. I consider it a European event because there were 4 out of 8 European teams, so I had that one in there. I was seriously on the fence about which one of those 2 tournaments would take my second place. And in my eyes, I think Thunderpick beats it out just a little bit. The production value I thought was really cool online. I don't know if, because Dwayne, I know that you went to EPICLAN in the last couple of days, but I joined up Ted because Zephyr was sick.
That's right.
And I subbed in for him and made the jokes that we had.
The memes. I saw one of them with the anime character. I didn't know the reference at all, but I saw it.
Because we were joking about, because there was some guy from, was it Imperial? Or one of the Brazilian teams. The bald guy with the beard. And we were like, this guy looks familiar. We don't know who he is. And they flashed out just for Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I don't know the reference, but
it was so funny. And then we took Twitch chat memes and put them up and stuff. And it was just, it was very, very fun and funny. And it worked really well on the online portion. Then you get to the offline portion of it. And I think that this is the kind of ideal environment to host a Tier 2 LAN in. You've got a little venue. It's not huge, not massive. You don't have to pack out numbers in like some multi-thousand story multi-thousand-seater stadium, but you can do something that is a little bit low-key, so there's a lot of value towards it in terms of the prize pool, in terms of the caliber of opposition that's being played out here, and you can still make something that I think was really cool. I thought the talent did really, really well. I thought Dinko and Hugo were rather good as a duo, even though Harry and Hugo are typically one of my Tier 1 picks. I thought that the online guys, for the most part, did everything extremely well. I enjoyed working with the online production, and obviously, caveat, we did work on it, so there might be a little bit of bias there, but I think second place, it makes a lot of sense to me for Thunderpick.
Yeah, I'm going to go first with them, actually. I thought the actual arena LAN location was sick. I've never seen anything like that before. really cool. Kind of reminds me of a bit of a BYOC experience with the crowd being so close to the players. And another good aspect is it's really good for tier 2 teams with not only invites, but qualifications through the South American portion, from the North American portion, through the European series. I think it helps tier 2 teams get a bit of a crack, and we saw that with 3DMAX being one of the teams that pushed towards top 4. Now, yeah, it might have been nicer to see more of those squads. I mean, maybe OG you can kind of count in there as well. Would have been nicer to see more lesser known tier 2 squads in the top 4, but you got to beat the teams in front of you. So I think it's really good for tier 2. They got a really good prize pool as well, a lot of money on the line, which is going to be great with the whole circuit, with the Valve system. So yeah, overall, I was very happy with that tournament. So that's number 1 for me this time.
Okay, what's your number 2 then?
My number 2 is actually going to be EPICLAN 43.
He's done it again.
And the reason for it, I think it's insanely important for the UK and European scene right now. We are in a position of time where BYOCs just don't exist. I know that you've got the DreamHacks in Sweden, but you look at the CS that gets played there, mate, it's like level 3s and 4s on face. It's just local players going. We had 44 teams sign up for the CS. BYOC, nearly 6k in pounds in prize pool. Excellent amount of cash. Even a sponsor, I think, added an extra 1,000 to the prize pool. Top 4 has HLTV, so it's worth coming for to get basically experience to play on HLTV. I think it was a really good format from the admins. They took basically the Champions League system and brought it over. You try running a format for 44 teams at a BYOC LAN for volunteers, man, it's not easy. So I would say very fair play to the admins. They had a great system. I thought the seeding was pretty good. There was nothing that I could have complained about from that perspective. Yeah, I'm always going to say, I wish more teams got into the playoffs. But look, it's top 16 with 44 teams. I think it was really well done. And we had quite a lot of imports come out to this LAN.
Yeah.
I look at Verdun, okay, you've got 2 Irish players of Artist and Extinct. You've got Biscu, who's the coach, and you've got Divi, who's a French AWPer. So you're getting actual names that are flying over to England. The Belfast Storm roster, I think they had 2 international players, one from Estonia, I think it was. And then LTH and Byfield's team had a Finnish guy, and I want to say a Slovakian player, might have been Croatian, I can't remember exactly what the flag was. So you're starting to actually see why it's beneficial, not just for UK players, that we're getting international players flying out for this.
Well, honestly, considering the landscape of the Tier 2 scene looking into next year, where right now we've really only got the Skyesports qualifiers and the Compass Online things. We don't know what's going on with CCT. We don't know what's going on with ESL Challenger. I think Blast are going to try and play against some sort of online circuit, but they haven't really announced it yet. There are going to be a lack of Tier 2 Valve World Ranking, VRS tournaments, really.
Yep.
And I think that, even though I don't think that this particular event is worthy of fitting within that category, I do see the potential in which it could. Because you are right, that there aren't many Tier 2 definitive LANs per se for the grassroots.
Other than Frag, I think that's it.
Yeah, for the grassroots area of the Tier 2 space. So I don't know if that's going to have to get stimulated by Epic, though. That's the one thing that I sort of have to think about next, is that how does that sort of fit into how the company and how John wants to build up his event? Because EPICLAN has always been, and this has kind of been ragged on in the UK CS space. A lot of international teams look at that saying EPICLAN is the peak of competition. Well, now it's the only competition that they have at the moment. So it's I don't know how Epic wants to fit them in, because they haven't got that casual element of it. It's not just a LAN for competition only. But I do see the potential there. You've made some very good points, I think, about this one.
Just knowing that we used to have quite a flourished LAN circuit, not just in the UK, with iSeries, with Copenhagen Games, with the odd MPF LANs. Mate, we're just seeing none of them. None of them are existing. None of them are putting out events. I would give a shout out to Fragadelphia out in North America, because they are doing something. But in Europe, Epic are the only people right now. And I just look at what they did in their last LAN with the capabilities of pushing for what was the most teams they've had since Epic 26, which was all the way back in February of 2019. We're talking about legitimately 5 years, probably closer to 6 years since they've had that many teams, and they made it applicable. They did a good job. They did a good tournament. So, yeah, I'm going to put them down as second best tournament of the year because I think it's very important to the EU and UK scene.
And look, if all the fear-mongering about the esports winter is correct, I feel like EPICLAN is one of the companies that will rise from the ashes. If everything burns down, I think that John's built something that will stay stable and will stay alive past whatever bubble is going to pop if it does end up popping in the end. So my first place pick might not be the most original choice considering the two of us, but I went with EPIC Masters Espo this year.
Okay.
I know there were a ton of tech problems. I know they had some major issues when it came to getting matches started on time, but watching the arena phase and watching the way in which this production value was, I always enjoy EPIC Masters' production value. I think the team that they have there is sick. And again, we've worked with them before, so disclaimers there and everything like that. But the thing that really made it special for me this year, man, that analyst desk was hilarious, and I loved every bit about it. It was the most entertainment. I don't typically actively watch or seek out an analyst desk. I'll watch it because I want to see insights. I want to get information as to what all the other talent are trying to really push in terms of storylines, in terms of who's the best players, etc., etc. But that's only, first of all, that's only specific to a tier 1 environment, and we do a lot of tier 2 work. And second of all, I don't often find it interesting. I don't actively seek them out to watch them back unless I'm looking for certain information. This was the most entertaining desk that I have ever seen in CS. And Richard, Thorin, Maui, I know that they're mostly tier 1 guys because they've been around for ages and they know that they're very entertaining, but I wanted to highlight this event because I don't know if we're ever going to see that kind of desk again. I hope that we are going to see that desk again. I'm miffed that we missed out on Elisa this year exclusively to work with that kind of desk and get, you know, the knowledge and the teachings of those kind of veterans, but they made it such a level above any Elisa Masters that we've seen in my eyes, and so that alone elevates everything else for Elisa.
Yeah, I don't think I saw any of the live matchups until maybe map 2 or map 3 of the best of 5, and that's basically because we were in Serbia.
We were in Serbia.
We were doing another LAN.
I actually went back and watched them. I actively seeked them out because everyone told me this is the best desk you're ever going to see. These matches are, most of them were good. I didn't enjoy some of them. I thought that Yano obviously being involved, but I thought that they did enough on that desk to elevate all the rest of the issues, and that was the key thing that everyone was discussing coming out of Elisa. It wasn't about the fact that they had massively tech delays, that the arena stages were delayed beyond anything else that they had before. It was because of the fact that these guys made an entertaining show in the worst of circumstances, and that, in my eyes, is something that I think any TO can learn from.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Again, I only saw the last couple of maps in the best of 5, but what I did see was the 40-minute compilation on YouTube. So I watched all of that. So I would like to say that I got as much entertainment from that as what you could have got on the 3 days. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. All right. 2 more categories to go, Dwag.
Yes. Best Content Creator of the Year. Now, I've gone for 2 newer names that I haven't previously selected.
Okay.
What's your second pick for this category?
So I went with for my 2 picks went with a player and a member of talent.
Okay.
So my secondary pick was Sticko this year. And again, debatable as to whether he's a tier 2, tier 1 guy. You don't think so? You think tier 2?
Yeah.
A bit of a backhanded compliment there at the same time. No, Sticko's great. Sticko's got the production value and the insights that a player offers. Because the issue I always have when I watch players' content, this is the reason why I don't watch streams, is that they have a lot of knowledge, they just aren't entertaining about it. And Sticko has not only the entertainment value, but he has that knowledge as well, and he has the foresight to make his content as well produced as possible. And I absolutely love that. He's the only pro player that I will see in my sub box and immediately click on it so I can see what's going on. And his content is just brilliant. I love it to bits. I think it's so insightful. I loved his content. This was done not this year.
Is it the salary one?
The salary one, yeah. That was the one that really made me go, okay, this guy is a proper content creator. Because I only saw Sticko up prior to that point as just a regular old player, but if he doesn't get another job in terms of being a player, he's already doing some talent work at the moment, he's doing really well on that, then he can dip back on YouTube, and I think I would enjoy every single one of his videos.
It's raw and nice to have some of that insight into a player's life that we don't know about. The salary one in particular, I think, is the one that probably got the most eyes on his channel this year. So, yeah, a very good pick for second place.
100%.
My second place is going to be Ash, the coach for Gamer Legion. Ash's playbook. Now, I will say his videos are produced excellently, and it's produced by Zero, an ex-pro. If people follow the Tier 2 scene, he played on Hellraisers.
That's Zero.
That's Zero.
Sorry, I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was trying to think who you're talking about there for a second.
That's Zero.
I didn't know he had video editing skills. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so he's. I think Ash has spoken about a little bit of, in the past that he does producing, does editing, so he does all of the videos for Ash. I don't know if he's doing the editing right now, because on the lower third, whatever, the comments, it says that he's the producer, but Zero is involved. And I think the videos are just excellent. They're really well made, really good insight. Of course it is, because it's coming from a high-level coach.
Yes.
The reason I've given Ash second is because we're not really getting that many uploads, and that's fair enough. I mean, he is a full-time coach, but 7 uploads this year. Come on, Ash. Give us one a month. Make it happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, that's the reason why I sort of dipped Ash out of because he was on my shortlist as well. Yep. It's just the lack of uploads, and he's another one of those guys that if I see something in the sub box, I'm going to immediately click it. I'm immediately going to watch it, and because I know that it's going to be great to watch, insightful, and it's going to be just good, really. And so I again, if he'd put more out, he probably would have beat Sticko, I think.
Yeah. But maybe if he was putting more out, then that's probably a bad sign for Gamer Legion. Because the more uploads he does, the less work he's doing.
Then you have to pick. Do you want to be awarded Best Content Creator or Worst Managed Team of the Year? Which one do you want to go for, Ash? Make your decision.
It's true. Yeah.
Right. My first place pick is, as I said before, a member of talent, and I went with Tech Girl. I love her podcasts. Again, I love the way in which she presents and the way in which she's sort of structured her content. And this is kind of like also a bit of an award for Thorin at the same time, because Thorin pushed her in this right direction. And their podcast together, I think, has been really entertaining. She's got some great guests on who are also talent members who have got great insights, and they all share these in a very entertaining sort of way. I also love the fact as well, and this is something I wish more content creators would do, she not only puts them out on YouTube, she also makes and publishes an audio version of her podcast,
I didn't know that.
which you can get on Spotify, on iTunes, whatever you do. And for me, that's great because I love podcasts. So I go around to the gym, I put a podcast on. I go out to the shops, I put a podcast on. I'm heading into London later this evening. I'm going to have one of Tech Girl's podcasts on and listening to it. And not enough content creators that produce audio stuff do that. I think really it's only in Counter-Strike, Tech Girl, HLTV, and the Talking Counter podcast.
Tier 2 Talk.
Do you do it as well?
Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't even know that part. Well, there you go. You don't promote it very well, then, do you?
We're on Spotify.
You're on Spotify? Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, like, that's...
but you are right.
It's something that not a lot of people end up doing. Yeah. And I think that for her, it's made her very, very accessible in terms of the audience, because not all of us are all going to be fans of the game that are watching every single piece of content obsessively over every single matchup. We are, because it's our job.
Sure.
But in terms of the general audience, that's not always possible. And to have that extra bit of inkling, that extra bit of like just distribution, that you have that opportunity to have someone else listen to the show in a way that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, I think that's a huge thing for her, and it's made my life so much easier in terms of consuming our content. And again, the content itself is just top tier.
I mean, just as an example, I have to drive to come here to see Jay. I put a podcast on in the car. Now, I was listening to the second tier football podcast, but it makes the argument people do like to listen to a lot of things rather than watch. Now, my first, it is probably someone you have never even heard of, Jay. But this guy,
this is where Dwayne digs out another King T at this point.
Mate, I've been watching this guy quite a bit recently, and it's Igor Nor, Agonor. Now, this is storyline content on YouTube. A Norwegian fella. Videos are up to 30 minutes in length. We're talking about quite deep analyst segments, and I would say that he uploads really consistently. He's about 5 to 6 videos a month at the moment for long-form content. His editing is really good, and I think he's actually got a decent game-level understanding. I would say the majority of his videos are probably more tailored towards the casual audience rather than a nut out here where it's like pros. But honestly, mate, he does understand the game quite well. I think he's been showing some really cool stuff. And I don't know, like, I don't see this guy on Twitter. As in, I don't hear anyone talking about him. I've never in a broadcast ever heard his name being mentioned. But I'm watching this guy on YouTube. So I think he's a guy that's going under the radar quite a bit.
Gee, I'm just taking a look at his channel right now just because I'm very curious. Whenever you say storyline content, I'm always about that sort of stuff. And You are right. His latest upload from 12 days ago is an hour long. Like, Christ, okay.
And you watch it, and he's getting footage from demos. He's getting footage from VODs. He's editing little different radars, smoke animations, all those. Mate, it's very good. So, Igor, big shout out to you. You might not have a lot of people in the pro scene looking at your channel, but the king of tier 2, myself, is watching your content.
Look, he's got 17,000 subscribers, so like it might not be the pros looking at it, but someone definitely is looking at this.
And I hope he keeps it up for next year, because I know there's a lot of channels that they can kind of be on the upwards trajectory and then they kind of fall off. They don't upload. I'd like to see him consistently push, because he has some really good content.
He's been going for like a year or so now. There's actually quite a lot of videos. Okay, all right, I might have some catching up to do, I think.
Yeah.
So
shout out to that guy.
Shout out to that guy. Well done indeed. And one more to add to my sub box so I can start watching more Counter-Strike content.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, best jersey
Here
of
we
the
go,
year.
the traditional final awards.
Now, I will say that for organizations, I'd love for you guys to get pictures for HLTV uploads, because a lot of the time you see it on Twitter, and then they haven't uploaded the new HLTV photos of the players. We don't always see the newest of jerseys. You got to go looking for them a lot of the time.
I do feel like that. Okay, well, first of all, just to put this out there in case I've made a mistake, I definitely have taken all my jersey photos from HLTV.
So in case there is a newer one,
in case there's a newer one that I've also missed, that's another disclaimer to add towards this whole award show. But yeah, you are right, and as well as that, I'd like more opportunities to buy some jerseys, because there are some in the past that I've missed out on that I can no longer get, which is a bit disappointing from my personal perspective. But yeah, that's by the by. My second place pick is actually Endpoint in this one. And admittedly, this award is definitely more subjective than anything of the other ones that we have in the awards. I really enjoy Endpoint's color scheme for their jerseys. It's slick, it's dark, it's clean, it's beautiful. It makes me love it so much. And I've had Endpoint jerseys in the past, but none quite like this one. So I think I am going to pick this up for Christmas, I think.
Okay. Well, my second place is going to be Rebels, the Innocent & Co team. We saw them at Listen Masters Expo. It is eye-catching. You see one of their players walk past and you instantly know who it is. You know it's the Rebels. It's a bright red with a bit of like a comic book vibe to it with some of the stylistic designs. I really like their jersey because, again, I think it's eye-popping. You know exactly who it is straight away, and you don't get many dark red jerseys. You get the odd red patch, maybe with a Sangle one, but yeah, Rebels is a very good jersey. I've very liked looking at their one this year.
Yeah, they were shortlisted for me, so they were on the list. I feel like I might also have another one of your first place might also be shortlisted for me. I had a number of jerseys that I liked this year, but the king of the tier 2 jerseys, and I have to say that I think I picked these guys last year, or maybe you picked them last year as well. It's theMAKKU.
I think I did.
Which I'll admit they haven't changed their jersey all that much since last year. But I think that's a testament. The fact I'm picking them as my first place team is to how, or the first place jersey is to how good that particular jersey is. It's very color splash. It's got a lot of great sort of mixes between them and a bunch of colors that just work together on what is basically a white background for all intents. It is a very eye-catching jersey, as you mentioned before. It's not something that I would typically like for my personality, but I just think that I look at it every single time and I'm like, man, that is a good jersey that I want to get. So theMAKKU, I think I couldn't get yours last year. Can I get some this year, please? So what I said before about getting more purchase options, I'd like just one, you know, 2XL. With my name printed on the back and a pirate flag on the shoulder.
Okay, just everything. Get him the sleeves, get him the trackies, the hoodie. Yeah, well, my first place is going to be Permitter. Deep, dark blue color. They've got this whole graffiti scheme going down the center, and it's actually got esports words and terms. So it's not just random graffiti. It's actually, I think it's got Valorant in there. It's got CS. It's got all these different GGs and stuff like that. Yeah, I looked at their jerseys and I thought, man, that actually looks sick. They look really, really good. So, yeah, both eye-catching jerseys between Permitter and Rebels, but just that deep blue color, it's class. It is a good jersey from Permitter.
I'll admit, I had Permitter as my third place because I looked at that deep blue, compared it to Endpoint, and I was like, but I just think that Endpoints is a bit cleaner. I think there's a little bit too much going on personally in the Permitter one. But look, personal tastes, I can see why. Again, I had it down as number 3, so it's not really that far off. So
yeah. Well,
there you go.
We are done.
And we are done indeed.
I think the only thing now is to tell the audience have we missed a question? Do they maybe have one that we're just not even thinking about?
Yeah, maybe there's a category that you want to get featured in next year's awards. And I imagine we're going to have to do some revamping for then how the circuit's going to shift in 2025 as well.
Yeah,
so,
the non-Valve Tier 2 award. Yeah, not the Valve rankings.
The real Tier 2 awards, yeah.
Yeah, I would say... Yeah, there's been some good progressions in the Tier 2 scene this year. There's going to be a lot of our names of teams and players that we look at in that next degree next year, getting chances at Tier 1, playing in those top teams in the world. So it's been a successful year for Tier 2, and it's going to be an even more busier year next year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what else happens, because I think there are a number of events that will be missing from the calendar. I hope that they do come up eventually. I know that there's some concerns about, well, the deadlines have passed in terms of announcing your events, but I don't imagine that companies like Grid won't go without some sort of circuit. I don't imagine that, well, obviously Blast are looking to launch their online stuff as well to qualify into their events. I want to see what ESL Challenger are doing. So the calendar might look dry for Tier 2 right now, but I do feel like that there's more to come, and there's still stuff that needs to be revealed and released and announced. So just keep your eyes on all the socials and keep your eyes on everything that's going on, because I do think there's a potential in which this next year could be the most exciting year for Tier 2.
No, I agree completely. I think that this is where everyone is going to basically be pushing that boundary for what is Tier 1 now. I think everyone is going to be looking from a TO's perspective, players, organizations, teams. Everyone is looking at this year and saying, right, we basically want to be Tier 1. We don't want to be Tier 2 anymore. So, yeah, that's going to wrap it up. 4 years completed now, 3rd year in the studio. We might have to do something special for the 5-year Tier 2 awards. I have to think of something.
You did watch League of Legends World by any chance?
Oh, no.
That opening ceremony, they had the players sit on top of the O2 Arena. Maybe we should do that for the
Oh, yeah. Awards. Go on then. Let's just... Yeah, why not? Let's just do that.
Let's just do that. That's what you're going to look forward to next year. I'll get to work on that soon.
Yeah. Or just hang them up and fly them across. Get them on a trebuchet. Right, well, let's just close it up before we just ramble on any further. Cheers for tuning in, everyone, and see you next year for year number 5.